AWS, that we wanted to make sure we had a really good cybersecurity expert to kick off our program. Scott, if you could just share your screen, and we're all set and ready to go.
Awesome. Thanks, Ron, for the introduction. So I'm Scott Revillar. I'm a solutions engineer at Recorded Future. And today we'll be going over what that really means, what Recorded Future is all about, and then talking about how we integrate with AWS GuardDuty in order to provide actionable intelligence to security teams, right? And really, before I get into that, I think it's good to point out some of the challenges that are facing security teams today, right? So as I speak with other security practitioners, what we're seeing is there's really a need for automation to be put in place related to security. There's definitely a couple things that are going into that, and really part of that is a lack of labor force and skills, right? So there's not enough people to be hired in order to meet this need of going through alerts, going through incidents that are happening for security teams, and that's making them overwhelmed with the amount of data and alerts that they're not being able to actually action on their own, and this is creating a lapse, right? When we look at the industry as a whole and how many companies are being breached on a daily basis, and then with that, even some of the intelligence that they're using today, if they are using specific feeds, is understanding why something is bad instead of understanding that it is bad. And that really makes specific incidents or notables that you're getting more actionable to understand how you can action that, and really goes back to that lack of skill, right? Not everyone on the team has the same ability to action different notables the same way. And that's where I think intelligence comes in and helps with some of those issues. And so that's really how I want to frame today's discussion, is thinking about the issues that we're running into. And with that, I'll go ahead and share a couple slides on the technology of Recorded Future. And then from there, we'll get into our actual platform to show you what that intelligence looks like, so you can have an idea of how that's actionable. And then we'll go into a couple more slides related to AWS GuardDuty and what that integration looks like. And then at the end, we'll have time for questions, and I can go over some of the wins that I've been able to have with some other teams that I've worked with. So really, before we get into the platform, it's really good to understand what Recorded Future's technology is all about. And with Recorded Future, before I guess I get into that, as Ron mentioned, right, it's a play on words with the title, and that goes back to our founders, where recorded really means that we're recording all this data, we're caching all this data, and so we've been in business for over 10 years, and so we have a lot of data that we've cached, and AWS loves us for that reason, right? Because we're a customer of theirs as well, and so we're caching all this data within AWS. But what really the goal is taking all this historical data to predict and show trends in the future, right? And one example of that is recently, if you remember, the Capitol attacks that happened back in January. Some of our government customers were using our platform in order to get intelligence related to specific things going on dark web forums, where actors were talking about, showing up to the Capitol, what their plan of action was, and how many people were going to show up and coordinate a lot of those things. So as the events were starting to go on, what we were seeing as some of these government agencies were able to go back and look in time and see what these posts were looking like. Obviously, as we know, that was an event that happened that, I think with Recorded Future, if they would have been able to use a little bit better, and if they had the tools necessary, they could have maybe responded a little bit better. But, that's the past. But that's one example of where Recorded Future was used in collecting that historical data in order to respond to future events. So I think that's a really cool story, and something that I find really interesting with my Navy intelligence background. But as we segue what that really means to our intelligence graph. So our intelligence graph is really focused on machine learning and natural language processing. And what that means is collecting a lot of different data and connecting those dots. So as we think about trends in security, right, not only understanding IOCs like IP addresses, domains, but being able to connect that IOC dot to what threat actor or what type of malware is using that IOC in order to conduct an attack. And that's where recorded feature comes in to connect those dots, so giving you that actionability that we're going to talk about today. So, and with that, we have a lot of data that we're talking about here, and really where we try and send this when we work with teams is into specific tools that they might be using, right? So these are some of the different use cases that we help with, but really what we're going to be focused on today is that security operations and response use case around our SecOps intelligence module. And kind of covering, you know, those tools that I mentioned, our focus strategically is really on robust integrations with other security tools like AWS GuardDuty, like Splunk, like Palo Alto or Microsoft Azure Sentinel, right? Being able to give security practitioners the ability to stay within the tool that they're using and not necessarily have to learn a new tool or have to do a lot of clicks to get the data and intelligence that they're looking for. So from there, getting into the platform itself, what we're looking at here is an IP address intelligence card. So on the slide, if you saw that we have over 6 billion intelligence cards. Intelligence cards are our way of showcasing intelligence and data that's relevant to specific IOCs or other entities you may be interested in, whether that is a specific type of malware or a threat actor, and being able to pivot around within the platform to connect those dots. So from here, as we look at this IP address, we can see the risk involved with it, and we can see so we rate that from a 0 to 99, similar to maybe how other tools do that. But how we rate that might be different in the sense that we have 64 different risk rules that we go against, and then from there, within those rules, we provide the context behind that rule and why it's triggered. So as we can see some of the rules that have triggered with this, making it a high risk IP address. And one notable one is one of our proprietary sources, that is this network traffic analysis. And so our team internally has done reverse engineering on over 80 different types of malware families. And so because of that work that we've done, we're able to characterize and profile activity out on the internet related to servers using different types of malware to beacon out and be used as C2 servers. And then along with that, we're able to show specific ports that they're using and when we've seen this last activity. And so this goes into how we score and the age out factor, right? What we see typically, teams might be using free feeds or some sort of feed that is providing them data, but it's stale and it ages out, where it's not necessarily relevant anymore. So, you know, you can have that conversation of, is it better to have no data or stale data? I would say it's probably better to have no data at all than to have stale data, because stale data is just going to make you run around in circles and do a lot of work that if you had no data, you probably wouldn't do in the first place, right? And so as we look at this, recorded feature is really good at showing the data that's relevant right now as well as historically. So as we look at this specific rule, if this activity is no longer being seen within the last 7 days, then this rule will age out and that'll affect the overall score of this indicator, and then that'll be showcased within that tool you're using, like AWS GuardDuty. So not only understanding the real-time significant risk, right, making this actionable, so you're understanding what ports this specific IP address is targeting, but what type of malware. So if you want to do further investigation and start doing some threat hunting related to this malware family, you can do that.
Hey, Scott?
Yeah.
It sounds like one of the really cool things here, as I listen to this, and I always learn something, there are two big issues that I hear a lot from people. First, whether or not it's stale data or old data, it's relatively easy to get lots of data, but how do you turn that into valuable information is one big problem that people have. And the second thing is, well, even if we find some way to analyze the data, it's hard to hire people and smart people who can help give us guidance. And it looks like the biggest benefit for Recorded Future is you address those two problems, is how do you turn data into valuable actions and insights, and how do you address a staffing shortage, because there are lots of very competent, skilled strategic architects who may not have the detailed knowledge of the dark web, and you could address both of those issues.
Exactly, Ron. Yeah, and this brings me up to this little cursor that I'm hovering over, right? So that skills shortage, right? So if you do have someone on your team that's a little bit more junior that doesn't necessarily know what a C2 server is or why it might be risky, right? Is within the platform itself is giving that detailed information on why this is being seen as risky and really some actions to take from there. And that gets into even more along the lines of, as you have that labor shortage, those integrations are a killer for us, because if we can integrate with the tool that they're using and provide this actionable intelligence within the tool, then that's creating a lot of time saved and giving them the ability to not necessarily focus on learning something new and just integrate the intel that they need. So from there, wanted to cover quickly what it means for that Amazon GuardDuty integration. So the way that we bring in our data within integrations is what we call risk lists. You can really think of risk lists as like a separate feed, right? So it's a list of indicators that meet the specific threshold being talked about in the risk list, right? So we have this risk list, and this is any IPs that are associated with the C2 communicating server rule that we went over. And then this risk list is focused on, looks like I went to the next slide. So it looks like this one is for anything that has a score of 65 and above, and that's really what we consider malicious. So that's like that malicious threshold that we see. If you're looking for even more of an attributed or certified way of looking at it, maybe you want to integrate a risk list of 90 and above. But we have a lot of flexibility on specific ways that you want to integrate our indicators and our intelligence in general. And that's a great benefit that we have. And what this would look like is, if you were going in the GuardDuty, you would go into the risks and that you would update the risk list that you want with, with the links, and being able to, mark that as active or not. And then from there, what that'll do is, within the alerts that you're getting within GuardDuty, this will create new alerts if some of the activity that you're seeing in there is on those recorded future risk lists, right? And so as you're scrolling through a specific alert, what you'll see is the additional information that this is coming from recorded future. And what this provides is the ability to, detect more related to recorded futures intelligence. And then from there, the next step would be, after the correlation that we're going over, would be that enrichment piece, right? And so the way that we do enrichment with the Amazon GuardDuty integration is focused on what we call our browser extension. So going into our browser extension, what that would look like is, it's a plugin that we would add to the browser itself. And what it's doing is it's scraping all of the data that we're seeing on this specific tab. And then it's taking that data and looking it up on those risk lists that we mentioned back to the platform. And if we want to quickly triage what is the most risky indicators that we're seeing, we can click on that plugin, open it up. We can see the different indicators that we can do within the browser extension itself. So we have a couple different ones, but today what we'll be focused on is IP address and domains. And so we can see, as we look at this data on URL scan, we can see that this domain is pretty risky, because we've been seeing it as a weaponized domain. It's been associated with phishing techniques through our partnership with Bitdefender. And then we can start seeing some of the other historical rules as well. And one more thing that we can do with this is, let's say you're looking within GuardDuty, right? And you want to quickly understand, as you're looking at a list of IP addresses or indicators, you want to be able to see the score within the page. We can add in this feature right here, where then, as I'm looking at this page, I'll be able to see the actual score itself. And as I hover over that indicator, it'll give me all of those rules associated to that indicator. Now from here, the next step would be into a further investigation would be to click on this, and what this will do is that'll bring up the recorded future intelligence card related to this specific indicator that might have happened within guard duty itself. So really, taking that, stepped approach of getting that correlation alert from there, doing the enrichment, and then from there, really understanding the actionability from there. And if you really need to escalate or do a further investigation, you can do that by going back to the platform. But that's really how today we're helping increase the efficiency within those investigation times within AWS guard duty. But that's, it's not siloed only to AWS. We do that for a lot of the different tools that we went over on one of those slides, showing the 40 out of the box integrations that we do.